Hello there. Tonight, we are going to explore the most relaxing facts about ancient Egypt to help you fall into a deep, restorative sleep. You've been carrying the weight of the modern world for too long. The noise, the hurry, the endless demands. But tonight, you're going to step backward through time into a civilization that measured its existence not in minutes or hours, but in the slow, predictable rhythm of a river. Ancient Egypt rose and fell with the Nile, that singular artery of life, cutting through an ocean of sand. For 3,000 years, people woke to the same sun, watched the same stars wheel overhead, and trusted that the river would flood, recede, and flood again. There was a certainty to their world that ours has forgotten. Tonight you're going to remember what it feels like to live in harmony with something larger than yourself, something ancient and patient and utterly indifferent to human anxiety. Let the Nile carry you now, as it carried them then, into the deep restorative silence of history. The Nile River is the longest river in the world, stretching over 4,100 miles from its sources in the highlands of East Africa to its delta on the Mediterranean Sea. But for the ancient Egyptians, the Nile wasn't just a river. It was the difference between life and death, between civilization and wilderness. The river created a narrow ribbon of fertility through one of the harshest deserts on Earth, a green corridor rarely more than a few miles wide on either side of the water. Beyond that strip of life, the desert began immediately, abruptly, a wall of sand and stone that the Egyptians called the Red Land, while the fertile valley was the Black Land, named for the rich, dark soil deposited by the annual floods. This stark division shaped everything about Egyptian civilization, their religion, their architecture, their entire worldview. They lived on the edge of two worlds, always aware that life was a gift from the river, that without it, there would be nothing but endless, empty sand. The annual flooding of the Nile was the most important event in the Egyptian calendar, the heartbeat around which all life organized itself. Every year, between June and September, the river would swell with water from distant rains in the Ethiopian highlands, rains the Egyptians themselves never saw, but whose effects they depended upon absolutely. The floodwaters would rise slowly, predictably, spilling over the banks and across the valley floor, depositing a fresh layer of nutrient-rich silt. This wasn't a destructive flood. It was a gentle, life-giving inundation that the Egyptians welcomed, even celebrated. They divided their year into 3 seasons based on the river's cycle: Akhet, the inundation; Peret, the growing season when the waters receded and crops could be planted; and Shemu, the harvest, when the fields were dry and the river at its lowest. Their entire civilization was synchronized to this rhythm, this ancient pulse that had been beating long before the first pyramid was built and would continue long after the last pharaoh fell. The predictability of the Nile's flood was what allowed Egyptian civilization to flourish with such stability. Unlike the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, which flooded unpredictably and often destructively, the Nile was reliable. The Egyptians could plan, could build, could invest in the future with confidence that the river would provide. This reliability fostered a sense of cosmic order, a belief that the universe operated according to Ma'at, truth, balance, harmony. The river's dependable cycle was evidence of divine order, proof that the gods were maintaining the proper functioning of the world. When the flood came on time and at the right height, it confirmed that all was well, that the pharaoh was ruling justly, that the rituals were being performed correctly. The river was both a physical reality and a spiritual barometer, a connection between the earthly and the divine. The Nile flowed from south to north, from the highlands toward the sea, but the prevailing winds blew from north to south, from the Mediterranean inland. This remarkable geographic coincidence meant that boats could sail upstream with the wind and drift downstream with the current. Travel in both directions was easy, efficient, natural. This made the Nile not just a source of water and fertility, but also a highway, a communication network that unified the entire length of Egypt. Ideas, goods, people, and culture could flow freely up and down the river. A farmer in the delta could share techniques with a farmer hundreds of miles upstream. Stone quarried in the south could be floated north to build temples and pyramids. The river connected disparate communities into a single, coherent civilization, creating a cultural unity that lasted for millennia. The Egyptians called their country Kemet, meaning the Black Land, a reference to the dark, fertile soil left by the Nile's floods. This wasn't just a descriptive name. It was an identity, a statement about what made Egypt Egypt. The black soil was life itself, the physical manifestation of the river's blessing. Farmers would wait for the floodwaters to recede, then plant their seeds directly into the wet, rich earth. The soil was so fertile that it required relatively little labor to produce abundant crops. Wheat and barley grew easily, providing the foundation for bread and beer, the staples of the Egyptian diet. Flax grew in the fields, providing fibers for linen. The river provided fish, waterfowl, and papyrus reeds. The Egyptians didn't have to struggle desperately for survival the way many ancient peoples did. The Nile gave generously, and this abundance freed them to build, to create, to develop one of the most sophisticated civilizations the ancient world had ever seen. The desert that surrounded the Nile Valley wasn't just empty wasteland. It was a protective barrier. To the east and west stretched vast expanses of sand and rock, inhospitable to armies, difficult to cross, offering no resources to sustain invaders. To the south, the Nile was interrupted by a series of cataracts, rocky rapids that made navigation difficult and served as a natural border. To the north, the Mediterranean provided some contact with other civilizations, but also a degree of isolation. Egypt was protected on all sides by geography, insulated from the constant invasions and upheavals that plagued other ancient civilizations. This geographic security allowed Egyptian culture to develop in relative peace, to maintain continuity over thousands of years. While empires rose and fell in Mesopotamia, while cities were sacked and rebuilt, Egypt endured, stable and unchanging, a civilization in conversation with itself across centuries. The Nile Delta, where the river fans out into multiple channels before emptying into the Mediterranean, was a landscape of marshes, lagoons, and fertile islands. This was Lower Egypt, the northern kingdom, distinct in character from the narrow valley of Upper Egypt to the south. The delta was lush, green, teeming with wildlife, herons and ibises, crocodiles and hippos, fish in abundance. Papyrus grew thick in the marshes, its tall stalks swaying in the breeze. The Egyptians harvested papyrus for everything from writing material to boat construction to sandals. The delta was also Egypt's gateway to the wider world, the place where Egyptian ships met traders from across the Mediterranean, where foreign goods and ideas entered the kingdom. It was a liminal space, neither fully Egyptian nor fully foreign, a place of mixing and exchange. The contrast between Upper and Lower Egypt was fundamental to Egyptian identity. Upper Egypt was the narrow valley, the older, more traditional heartland, associated with the vulture goddess Nekhbet. Lower Egypt was the broad delta, more cosmopolitan, more connected to the outside world, associated with the cobra goddess Wadjet. The unification of these two regions under a single ruler was considered the founding moment of Egyptian civilization. And pharaohs wore the double crown, the white crown of Upper Egypt nested inside the red crown of Lower Egypt, to symbolize their rule over both lands. This duality was everywhere in Egyptian thought. The two lands, the two ladies, the vulture and the cobra, the balance between desert and river, between order and chaos, between life and death. The Nile's water was sacred, life-giving, but it was also dangerous. Crocodiles lurked in the shallows, massive predators that could take a person in an instant. Hippos, despite their seemingly placid appearance, were aggressive and territorial, responsible for more human deaths than any other large animal in Egypt. The river gave life, but it also demanded respect, caution, awareness. This duality, the Nile as both nurturer and threat, was reflected in Egyptian religion. Sobek, the crocodile god, was both feared and worshipped, seen as a protector, but also as a dangerous force that needed to be appeased. The river was not tame. It was wild, powerful, and the Egyptians understood that their prosperity depended on maintaining the right relationship with forces they could never fully control. The Nilometer was one of the most important technological innovations in ancient Egypt, a simple but ingenious device for measuring the height of the Nile's annual flood. Stone steps or marked columns were built along the riverbank, allowing priests and officials to track the water level with precision. The height of the flood determined the agricultural yield for the year, which in turn determined tax rates, food distribution, and economic planning. A flood that was too low meant drought and famine. A flood that was too high could destroy villages and infrastructure. But a flood at just the right height, around 16 cubits at Memphis, meant abundance, prosperity, a year of plenty. The Nilometer readings were recorded, studied, compared across years and decades. The Egyptians were collecting data, looking for patterns, trying to understand and predict the river's behavior. It was an early form of scientific observation, born from the practical need to survive and thrive in a landscape dominated by a single all-important river. The soil deposited by the Nile wasn't just fertile, it was renewing. Each year's flood brought a fresh layer of silt, replenishing nutrients, preventing the soil from becoming exhausted. This meant that Egyptian farmers could plant the same fields year after year, generation after generation, for thousands of years without depleting the land. There was no need for crop rotation, no need to let fields lie fallow. The river did the work of renewal, ensuring that the land remained productive indefinitely. This agricultural sustainability was the foundation of Egypt's longevity as a civilization. While other ancient societies exhausted their soils and collapsed, Egypt endured, fed by a river that never stopped giving. The Egyptians developed an extensive system of irrigation to maximize the benefit of the Nile's floods. They dug canals and basins, creating networks that could capture and distribute floodwater across a wider area. These weren't just practical engineering projects. They were communal efforts that required coordination, planning, and cooperation among villages and regions. The need to manage water resources fostered social organization, hierarchical structures, centralized authority. Some historians argue that Egyptian civilization itself, the pharaohs, the bureaucracy, the monumental architecture, emerged from the need to organize labor for irrigation projects. The river didn't just feed Egypt, It shaped the very structure of Egyptian society. The Nile was also a source of building materials. The riverbanks provided mud for bricks, the most common building material for houses, palaces, and even some temples. The mud was mixed with straw, formed into rectangular molds, and dried in the sun. These mud bricks were simple, inexpensive, and perfectly suited to Egypt's dry climate. Stone was reserved for sacred and eternal structures, temples and tombs. But the everyday world of ancient Egypt was built from Nile mud, from the very substance of the river itself. Even in death, Egyptians returned to the river. The western bank where the sun set was traditionally the land of the dead, the place where tombs and mortuary temples were built. The east bank, where the sun rose, was for the living. The river divided life from death, the temporal from the eternal, but also connected them, a constant presence flowing between the two realms. Papyrus, the plant that grew abundantly in the Nile's marshes, gave Egypt one of its most important exports and one of history's most significant inventions: paper. The Egyptians discovered that by cutting the papyrus stalks into thin strips, laying them in perpendicular layers, and pressing them together, they could create a smooth, durable writing surface. Papyrus scrolls became the medium for Egyptian literature, religious texts, administrative records, and scientific treatises. The knowledge of papyrus production was a closely guarded secret, and Egypt maintained a near monopoly on paper production for centuries. The word paper itself comes from papyrus. The plant that grew in the Nile's waters became the vehicle for preserving and transmitting human knowledge, a gift from the river that would outlast the civilization that created it. And so tonight, as you feel yourself drifting, imagine standing on the banks of the Nile 3,000 years ago. The sun is setting, turning the water to gold, then copper, then deep indigo. The air is cooling after the heat of the day. You can hear the calls of birds settling into the papyrus marshes, the distant lowing of cattle being driven home. The river flows past, eternal and patient, carrying the same water it carried yesterday, the same water it will carry tomorrow. There's no urgency here, no rush. The river has been flowing for millions of years and will flow for millions more. You're just a brief witness to its passage, a single breath in the long, slow respiration of the land. Let that perspective settle over you now. Let the river carry away the concerns of your day, the anxieties of your time. You're safe here, on the banks of the Nile, in the Black Land, where the rhythm of life is measured in floods and harvests, in the rising and setting of the sun, in the eternal, unchanging flow of water through the desert. Rest now. The river will still be here when you wake. The desert holds secrets that the river never could. While the Nile gave life, nourished crops, and sustained the living, the desert was where the Egyptians built for eternity. Stone doesn't decay like mud brick. It doesn't crumble with time or wash away with floods. Stone endures, and the Egyptians knew this. They quarried limestone and granite, dragged blocks weighing tons across impossible distances, and assembled them into structures so massive, so precisely engineered, that they still stand today, 45 centuries later, barely diminished. The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were statements, arguments made in stone against the inevitability of death and forgetting. They were humanity's first serious attempt to build something that would last forever. And in that ambition, in that audacious refusal to accept impermanence, there's something deeply, quietly moving. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, was the tallest human-made structure in the world. for nearly 4,000 years. It stood 481 feet high originally, though the loss of its outer casing stones has reduced it slightly. To put that in perspective, it remained the tallest building on Earth until the construction of Lincoln Cathedral in England in 1311 CE. 4,000 years of supremacy. The pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons, with some granite blocks in the king's chamber weighing as much as 80 tons. The precision of the construction is extraordinary. The base is level to within just over half an inch, and the sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that modern engineers still find impressive. This wasn't primitive construction. This was sophisticated engineering, mathematical precision, organizational genius on a scale that required coordinating thousands of workers, managing logistics, solving problems that had never been solved before. The pyramids were not built by slaves, despite what popular imagination suggests. Recent archaeological evidence from workers' villages near the Giza Plateau reveals that the pyramid builders were paid laborers, skilled craftsmen, and seasonal workers who were fed, housed, and cared for. They received rations of bread and beer, medical attention when injured, and proper burials when they died. Graffiti left by work gangs on the stones themselves, names like Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkor, suggest a sense of pride, even camaraderie among the workers. They were participating in a sacred project, building a stairway to heaven for their god-king, ensuring his successful journey to the afterlife. It was religious devotion as much as labor, a collective effort that united the entire kingdom in a common purpose. The outer casing of the Great Pyramid was originally covered in highly polished white limestone, called Tura limestone, quarried from across the Nile. This casing would have made the pyramid gleam brilliantly in the Egyptian sun, visible for miles across the desert, a beacon of white light rising from the golden sand. The capstone, or pyramidion, was likely covered in gold or electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, catching the first and last rays of sunlight each day. Imagine seeing the pyramids as the ancient Egyptians saw them. Not the weathered, stepped structures we know today, but smooth, gleaming monuments that seemed to glow with divine light. Most of the casing stones were stripped away over the centuries, repurposed for building projects in Cairo, but a few remain near the top of Khafre's pyramid, giving us a glimpse of what once was. The internal chambers and passages of the Great Pyramid are marvels of engineering in their own right. The Grand Gallery, a corbelled passage rising at a steep angle toward the king's chamber, is 153 feet long and nearly 30 feet high, with walls that step inward as they rise, creating a soaring space within the solid mass of the pyramid. The king's chamber itself is built entirely of red granite brought from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. The ceiling is formed by 9 massive granite slabs, weighing approximately 400 tons in total, and above them are 5 relieving chambers designed to distribute the weight of the pyramid and prevent the ceiling from collapsing. The engineering required to construct these spaces to move such massive stones into position deep within the pyramid to ensure structural stability under millions of tons of stone, it represents a level of technical sophistication that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. The purpose of the pyramids was fundamentally religious. They were machines for resurrection, designed to facilitate the pharaoh's transformation from mortal king to immortal god. The pyramid shape itself was symbolic. It represented the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at the creation of the world, the first solid ground. the place where life began. By building a pyramid, the pharaoh was recreating that moment of creation, establishing himself as a divine being who would be reborn just as the sun was reborn each morning. The pyramid was also seen as a ramp or stairway to the sky, a means for the pharaoh's Ka, spirit, to ascend to join the sun god Ra in his eternal journey across the heavens. Every element of the pyramid's design served this purpose: the alignment with the stars, the orientation to the cardinal directions, the internal chambers and passages. It was architecture in service of theology, stone shaped by belief. The Sphinx, that enigmatic guardian with the body of a lion and the head of a human, sits on the Giza plateau gazing eternally eastward toward the rising sun. It's the largest monolithic statue in the world, carved from a single outcrop of limestone bedrock, measuring 240 feet long and 66 feet high. The face is believed to represent the pharaoh Khafre, whose pyramid stands behind it, though some theories suggest it might be older, might even predate the pyramids themselves. The Sphinx has weathered millennia of sandstorms, erosion, and human intervention. Its nose is missing, broken off at some point in history, and its beard, which once extended from its chin, now resides in pieces in the British Museum and the Cairo Museum. Yet it endures, patient and inscrutable, a symbol of Egypt itself. The Sphinx was buried up to its neck in sand for much of its history, emerging and being reburied repeatedly over the centuries. The first recorded excavation was by Thutmose IV in the 18th dynasty, around 1400 BCE. Already 1,000 years after the Sphinx was carved, Thutmose left a stele between the Sphinx's paws, describing a dream in which the Sphinx spoke to him, promising him the throne of Egypt if he would clear away the sand. He did, and he became pharaoh, and the story was recorded in stone. The Sphinx has been excavated and cleared multiple times since, most recently in the modern era, but the sand always wants to reclaim it, wants to bury it again in the desert from which it was carved. The alignment of the pyramids with celestial bodies reveals the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of astronomy. The 3 pyramids of Giza are arranged in a pattern that some researchers believe mirrors the 3 stars of Orion's belt, a constellation the Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife. The shafts in the Great Pyramid point toward specific stars. The northern shaft from the King's Chamber aligns with Thuban, the pole star of that era, while the southern shaft points toward Orion's belt. These weren't arbitrary choices. The stars were eternal, unchanging, divine. By aligning the pyramid with the stars, the builders were connecting the pharaoh's tomb to the heavens, ensuring his place among the immortal gods. The construction of the pyramids required not just engineering skill, but also administrative and organizational genius. Feeding, housing, and coordinating a workforce of thousands over decades demanded sophisticated logistics. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive bakeries near the pyramid sites, capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread daily. There were breweries, granaries, dormitories, medical facilities. The pyramid wasn't just a construction project. It was an entire economy, a mobilization of national resources on a scale that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. And all of this was accomplished without iron tools, without the wheel for transport, without pulleys or cranes. They used copper tools, wooden sledges, ramps, levers, and human muscle. The limitations make the achievement even more remarkable. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built around 2670 BCE, was the first pyramid, the prototype that would inspire all the others. It began as a traditional mastaba, a flat-roofed rectangular tomb, but the architect Imhotep, one of the few non-royal Egyptians whose name has survived through history, had a revolutionary idea: stack mastabas of decreasing size on top of each other, creating a stepped structure that rose toward the sky. The result was a pyramid in 6 stages, 203 feet high, unlike anything that had been built before. Imhotep wasn't just an architect. He was a polymath, a physician, a priest, a sage. He was later deified, worshipped as a god of wisdom and medicine. His step pyramid was the beginning of an architectural tradition that would define Egypt for centuries. The red pyramid and the bent pyramid at Dashur represent the experimental phase between the step pyramids and the true smooth-sided pyramids of Giza. The bent pyramid is particularly fascinating. It starts at a steep angle of 54 degrees, then abruptly changes to a shallower 43-degree angle about halfway up, giving it a distinctive bent appearance. Why the change? Most likely the builders realized that the original angle was too steep, that the structure was becoming unstable, and they adjusted mid-construction to prevent collapse. It's a visible record of problem solving, of ancient engineers adapting their plans in real time. The red pyramid, built afterward, uses the shallower angle from the start and is considered the first successful true pyramid, the direct ancestor of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Inside the pyramids, the walls of burial chambers and passageways in some later pyramids are covered with hieroglyphic texts known as the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, dating to around 2400 BCE. These aren't decorative, they're functional, magical spells and incantations designed to protect the pharaoh's spirit and guide it through the dangers of the afterlife. They describe the journey the deceased must make, the obstacles to overcome, the words to speak to pass through gates guarded by demons and gods. Reading them is like reading an ancient instruction manual for death, a guidebook to the underworld, written in stone, so it could never be lost or forgotten. The pyramids were part of larger complexes that included mortuary temples, causeways, and valley temples. The entire complex was a machine for maintaining the pharaoh's cult after death, a place where priests would perform daily rituals, make offerings, recite prayers. The pharaoh's ka needed to be fed, honored, remembered. The pyramid was just the most visible part of an elaborate system designed to ensure the pharaoh's eternal survival. These complexes employed hundreds of priests and workers, owned vast estates to provide offerings, and functioned as economic and religious centers for centuries after the pharaoh's death. And so tonight, as you feel the weight of sleep beginning to settle over you, imagine standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid at sunset. The stone is still warm from the day's heat, radiating back the sun's energy. The desert stretches away in all directions, silent and vast. Above you, the pyramid rises, block upon block, 2 million stones stacked with impossible precision, a mountain made by human hands. It's been standing here for 45 centuries. It will likely stand for 45 more. Empires have risen and fallen in its shadow. Languages have been born and died. The world has changed beyond recognition, but the pyramid remains, patient and eternal, a testament to the human desire to build something that lasts, to leave a mark that time cannot erase. Let that permanence comfort you now. Let the weight of all that stone, all that history anchor you. You're part of a story that stretches back thousands of years and will continue long after you're gone. Rest now in the shadow of eternity, the pyramids will still be standing when you wake. The grandeur of pyramids and the mysteries of gods can make ancient Egypt feel distant, untouchable, a civilization of monuments rather than people. But beneath the stone and ceremony, there was daily life, ordinary, human, remarkably familiar in some ways. People woke with the sun, worked through the heat of the day, sought shade in the afternoon, gathered with family in the evening. They wore linen that breathed in the desert heat, ate bread and beer, played games, told stories, worried about their children, and hoped for good harvests. The textures of their daily existence, the feel of linen against skin, the taste of honey and dates, the cool relief of water from a clay jar. These are the details that make history breathe, that transform ancient Egypt from a museum exhibit into a place where real people lived real lives. Linen was the fabric of Egypt, woven from flax that grew abundantly in the Nile Valley. The Egyptians were master weavers, capable of producing linen so fine, so sheer, that it was nearly transparent. The finest linen, called royal linen or woven air, was reserved for pharaohs and the wealthy, fabrics so delicate that an entire garment could be pulled through a finger ring. But even ordinary Egyptians wore linen, though of coarser weave. Linen was perfect for Egypt's climate. It breathed, allowed air circulation, absorbed moisture, and stayed cool even in intense heat. Cotton wouldn't arrive in Egypt until much later, and wool was considered ritually impure, associated with animals and therefore unsuitable for temple wear. Linen was clean, pure, a product of the earth and the river, and it dressed everyone from farmers to pharaohs, from birth to burial. The process of making linen was labor-intensive, but deeply embedded in Egyptian life. Flax was harvested, the fibers separated through a process called retting, where the stalks were soaked in water until the outer layers rotted away, leaving the strong inner fibers. These fibers were then beaten, combed, and spun into thread on simple drop spindles. Women did most of this work, sitting in the shade of their homes, spinning thread while watching children, talking with neighbors, participating in the communal rhythm of village life. The thread was then woven on horizontal looms, often set up outdoors to take advantage of space and light. The resulting fabric was bleached white in the sun, sometimes left in its natural cream color, occasionally dyed, though white was always preferred for its purity and its ability to reflect heat. Egyptian clothing was simple, elegant, designed for comfort in a hot climate. Men typically wore a simple kilt or loincloth, a rectangular piece of linen wrapped around the waist and secured with a belt. Women wore straight-fitted dresses with one or two shoulder straps, the fabric clinging to the body, sometimes pleated for decoration and flexibility. Children often went naked until puberty. There was no shame in this, no need for clothing when the weather was warm, and the culture saw the human body as natural and unproblematic. The wealthy wore more elaborate garments, with pleating, draping, and layering that demonstrated both their status and the skill of their weavers. But even the most elaborate Egyptian clothing maintained a simplicity, an elegance of line that feels remarkably modern. Jewelry was where Egyptians expressed their love of color and ornament. Both men and women wore jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, anklets, earrings, rings. The wealthy had pieces made of gold, silver, and precious stones. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, turquoise from Sinai, carnelian from the desert, amethyst, jasper, feldspar. But even ordinary people wore jewelry made from faience, a glazed ceramic material in brilliant blues and greens, or from beads of stone, shell, or bone. Jewelry wasn't just decorative, it was protective, magical. Amulets in the shapes of gods, sacred animals, and symbols were worn to ward off evil, ensure health, bring good fortune. The Ankh, the Jed pillar, the Eye of Horus, these weren't fashion statements. They were prayers worn on the body, constant reminders of divine protection. Egyptian homes were built from mud brick, the same material that formed the foundation of the civilization. The bricks were made from Nile mud mixed with straw, formed in wooden molds, and dried in the sun. These homes were simple, practical, designed to stay cool in the heat. Walls were thick, providing insulation. Roofs were flat, often used as additional living space in the evening when the air cooled. Windows were small and placed high on the walls to allow air circulation while keeping out the intense sun. Floors were packed earth, sometimes covered with reed mats. The houses of the wealthy were larger, with multiple rooms arranged around a central courtyard, with gardens, pools, and painted walls. But even the grandest homes were made of mud brick. Stone was for eternity, for temples and tombs. Mud brick was for life, temporary and renewable, returning to the earth when the building was abandoned. Inside these homes, furniture was minimal but beautifully crafted. The Egyptians had beds, chairs, stools, and storage chests, often made from wood inlaid with ivory, ebony, or precious metals. Beds were raised platforms with woven reed or leather mattresses, sometimes with footboards, but rarely with headboards. Instead of pillows, Egyptians used headrests, curved supports that elevated the head, keeping it cool and protecting elaborate hairstyles. These headrests seem uncomfortable to modern sensibilities, but they were practical in a hot climate, allowing air to circulate around the head and neck. Chairs were status symbols. The wealthy sat on chairs with backs and arms, sometimes with cushions. Ordinary people sat on stools or on the floor on woven mats. Food in ancient Egypt was simple but nourishing, based on the agricultural abundance provided by the Nile. Bread and beer were the staples, consumed at every meal by everyone from pharaohs to laborers. Egyptian bread was made from emmer wheat or barley, ground into flour on stone querns. Hard, repetitive work that wore down the teeth of everyone who ate it, as sand from the grinding stones inevitably mixed with the flour. The bread was baked in clay ovens, producing dense, nutritious loaves that could be flavored with dates, honey, or herbs. Beer was made from partially baked bread that was crumbled into water, fermented, and strained. It was thick, nutritious, mildly alcoholic, and safe to drink. The fermentation process killed waterborne pathogens. Beer wasn't a luxury or an indulgence. It was a dietary staple, a source of calories and nutrients, consumed by adults and children alike. Beyond bread and beer, the Egyptian diet included vegetables: onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, cucumbers, beans, lentils. Fruit was abundant: dates, figs, grapes, pomegranates, melons. The wealthy ate meat: beef, goat, mutton, duck, goose. But ordinary people ate meat only occasionally, during festivals or special occasions. Fish from the Nile was more common, though some fish were considered sacred and forbidden. Honey was the primary sweetener, harvested from bees kept in cylindrical clay hives. The Egyptians also used oils from sesame, flax, and olives for cooking and for lamps. The diet was healthy, varied, rich in grains and vegetables, lower in meat than modern Western diets, but nutritionally balanced. Egyptians ate with their hands, sitting on the floor or on low stools around a mat or low table. There were no forks or spoons. Bread served as both food and utensil, used to scoop up stews, vegetables, and sauces. Meals were communal, social events, times for family to gather, for stories to be told, for the day's events to be discussed. The wealthy hosted elaborate banquets with multiple courses, entertainment by musicians and dancers, servants circulating with food and drink. But even in the humblest home, meals were a time to pause, to share, to participate in the basic human ritual of eating together. Hygiene was important to the Egyptians, both for practical and religious reasons. They bathed regularly, using water from the Nile and natron, a naturally occurring salt, as a cleansing agent. The wealthy had bathrooms in their homes, with stone or ceramic basins for washing. Ordinary people bathed in the river or used water from jars. Cleanliness was associated with purity, with being fit to approach the gods. Priests shaved their entire bodies and bathed multiple times a day before performing rituals. Everyone, regardless of status, paid attention to personal grooming. The Egyptians were among the first people to use cosmetics, and they used them extensively. Both men and women wore kohl, a black powder made from galena, lead sulfide or soot, applied around the eyes in dramatic lines that extended to the temples. This wasn't just vanity. The kohl reduced glare from the intense sun and had antibacterial properties that protected against eye infections, which were common in the dusty, sandy environment. They also used green eye paint made from malachite. Lips and cheeks were colored with red ochre, mixed with fat or oil. Henna was used to dye hair, nails, and sometimes palms and soles of feet. Perfumes and scented oils were highly valued. Myrrh, frankincense, lotus, cinnamon. The Egyptians understood that appearance mattered, that presentation was a form of respect for oneself and others. Hair care was elaborate. The wealthy wore wigs made from human hair, styled in complex braids, curls, and arrangements. Wigs protected the head from the sun and were more comfortable than natural hair in the heat. Underneath, people often shaved their heads for coolness and cleanliness. Children had their heads shaved except for a single side lock, a distinctive hairstyle that marked them as young. Priests shaved their heads and bodies completely. Ordinary people kept their hair short or tied back, practical styles for working in the heat. Children in ancient Egypt were valued, loved, played with toys that would be recognizable today. Archaeologists have found dolls, balls, spinning tops, board games, toy animals with movable parts. Children played games of chase, of hide and seek, of make-believe. They had pets, dogs, cats, monkeys, birds. They learned through play and through apprenticeship, watching their parents work and gradually taking on responsibilities. Education was available primarily to boys of wealthy families who learned to read and write to become scribes or priests. Most children learned the trade of their parents: farming, weaving, pottery, carpentry. But childhood was recognized as a distinct phase of life, a time for growth and learning before the responsibilities of adulthood. The Egyptians loved games, and one of the most popular was Senet, a board game played on a grid of 30 squares. The rules have been partially reconstructed from paintings and texts, though some details remain uncertain. It was a game of strategy and chance, played with throwing sticks instead of dice. But Senet was more than entertainment. It had religious significance, representing the journey of the soul through the afterlife. Winning the game symbolized successfully navigating the dangers of the underworld and achieving eternal life. Game boards have been found in tombs, placed there so the deceased could continue playing in the afterlife. Music and dance were integral to Egyptian life, present at religious ceremonies, festivals, banquets, and even during work. Musicians played harps, lyres, lutes, flutes, drums, and sistrums, rattles sacred to the goddess Hathor. Singers performed, often accompanied by hand clapping and rhythmic movement. Dance was expressive, athletic, performed by professionals at elite gatherings, but also by ordinary people during festivals. Music and dance weren't separate from daily life. They were woven into it, expressions of joy, devotion, community. The working day was structured around the heat. People rose at dawn, worked during the cooler morning hours, rested during the intense midday heat, and resumed work in the late afternoon and early evening. This rhythm respected the climate, acknowledged the limits of the human body working in extreme heat. There was a practicality to Egyptian life, a sensible adaptation to environment that modern people, with our climate control and artificial lighting, have largely lost. And so tonight, as sleep begins to claim you, imagine yourself in an ancient Egyptian home as the day ends. The sun has set, and the fierce heat is finally breaking. You're sitting on a reed mat on the roof of your mud brick house, wearing a simple linen garment that moves with the evening breeze. The Nile is visible in the distance, a dark ribbon reflecting the first stars. Someone is playing a flute nearby, a simple melody that drifts through the warm air. You can smell bread baking, hear the murmur of voices from neighboring roofs, feel the rough texture of the mat beneath you. The day's work is done. Tomorrow will bring more work, but tomorrow is not yet here. Right now, there's just this moment, the cooling air, the emerging stars, the quiet satisfaction of a day completed. Let that simplicity settle over you. Let the ancient rhythms of work and rest, heat and coolness, day and night carry you into sleep. The Egyptians understood something we've forgotten, that life is made of small moments, simple pleasures, the daily repetition of necessary tasks performed with care. Rest now, in the golden hour between day and night, between waking and sleeping. Rest as they rested 3,000 years ago under the same stars. The Egyptians didn't see the world as we do, divided neatly into natural and supernatural, physical and spiritual. For them, everything was alive, everything was divine. The sun wasn't just a ball of burning gas, it was Ra, the supreme god, sailing across the sky in his solar bark, battling the forces of chaos each night in the underworld, before being reborn at dawn. The Nile wasn't just water, it was the gift of Hapi, the god of the flood. The desert wind, the crocodile in the river, the ibis stalking through the marshes, all were manifestations of divine power. All were threads in a vast cosmic tapestry where gods and humans, earth and sky, life and death were interwoven. To understand ancient Egypt, you must understand that their gods weren't distant, abstract concepts. They were present, immediate, woven into every moment of existence. Ra, the sun god, was the king of the gods, the creator who brought himself into being at the beginning of time and then created everything else. Each day, Ra sailed across the sky in the Manjet, the boat of millions of years, bringing light and life to the world. But each evening as the sun set in the west, Ra entered the Duat, the underworld, and began a perilous 12-hour journey through darkness. Each hour of the night presented different dangers: demons, serpents, the forces of chaos trying to prevent the sun's rebirth. The greatest threat was Apophis, a massive serpent who embodied chaos and non-existence, who tried each night to swallow Ra and end creation itself. But Ra was protected by other gods who sailed with him, and each dawn he emerged victorious, reborn, bringing another day to the world. This wasn't mythology in the sense of make-believe. This was the Egyptian explanation for the most fundamental fact of existence. The sun rises, sets, and rises again. The daily miracle of dawn was proof that the gods were doing their work, that order was triumphing over chaos. The journey of Ra through the underworld was documented in funerary texts like the Amduat, the book of what is in the underworld, which described each of the 12 hours of night in vivid detail. These weren't just stories. They were maps, guides that the deceased could use to navigate the same dangerous journey. The texts described the landscapes Ra passed through: lakes of fire, caverns filled with serpents, regions of total darkness where even the sun god's light struggled to penetrate. In the 7th hour, Ra faced Apophis directly, and the outcome of this battle determined whether the sun would rise again. The gods Set and Mehen protected Ra, fighting off the chaos serpent, ensuring the continuation of existence. Every sunrise was a victory, a reassurance that the cosmic order remained intact. Osiris was the god of the dead, the ruler of the underworld, but his story is one of death and resurrection that gave hope to every Egyptian. Osiris was originally a king of Egypt, a good and just ruler who taught humans agriculture and civilization. But his brother Set, jealous and chaotic, murdered him, dismembered his body, and scattered the pieces across Egypt. Osiris's wife Isis, the goddess of magic and devotion, searched tirelessly for the pieces, found them, and through her magical power, reassembled Osiris and brought him back to life. Not to the living world, but as the eternal king of the dead. Osiris became the judge of souls, the one who weighed hearts against the feather of Ma'at to determine who was worthy of eternal life. His story promised that death was not the end, that resurrection was possible, that even the murdered and dismembered could be made whole again. The resurrection of Osiris was intimately connected to the agricultural cycle. Just as Osiris died and was reborn, so too did the grain, planted in the earth, seemingly dead, then sprouting to new life. Osiris was often depicted with green skin, the color of vegetation, the color of renewal. During festivals, Egyptians would create Osiris beds, molds in the shape of Osiris filled with soil and planted with grain. As the grain sprouted and grew, it symbolized the god's resurrection and promised the same for all who followed him. Death was not an ending but a transformation, a passage from one form of existence to another, as natural and inevitable as the sprouting of seeds. Isis was perhaps the most beloved goddess in Egypt, worshipped as the ideal mother, the devoted wife, the powerful magician. Her cult eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean world, and she was still worshipped in Rome centuries after the pharaohs had fallen. Isis represented loyalty, love, magical power, and the fierce protection of a mother for her child. After Osiris was murdered, Isis protected their son Horus, hiding him in the marshes of the delta, raising him in secret until he was old enough to challenge Set and reclaim his father's throne. She was invoked by women in childbirth, by the sick seeking healing, by anyone in need of protection. Her image, a woman with a throne-shaped crown, or with the horns of a cow cradling the sun disk, appeared in temples, homes, and tombs throughout Egypt. The magical power of Isis was legendary. One myth tells how she tricked Ra himself into revealing his secret name, the source of his power. She created a serpent from Ra's own saliva and earth, and when it bit him, the poison caused him such agony that he agreed to tell Isis his true name in exchange for healing. With this knowledge, Isis gained power over creation itself. This story wasn't just entertainment. It was a teaching about the power of knowledge, the importance of names, and the idea that even the greatest gods could be influenced by wisdom and cunning. Horus, the falcon-headed god, was the divine prototype of the pharaoh. Every living pharaoh was considered the earthly manifestation of Horus, the rightful king who had defeated chaos and restored order. Horus's eyes were the sun and the moon, and the eye of Horus became one of the most powerful protective symbols in Egypt, used in amulets, painted on boats, inscribed on tombs. The eye represented wholeness, healing, protection. It was the eye that Set had torn out during their battle, and that Thoth, the god of wisdom, had magically restored. To wear the eye of Horus was to invoke divine protection, to align yourself with the forces of order and kingship. The battle between Horus and Set was more than a family dispute. It was the cosmic struggle between order and chaos, between legitimate kingship and usurpation, between fertility and the barren desert. The conflict lasted for years, with neither side able to gain complete victory. Finally, the gods assembled in council to judge between them, and after much deliberation, Horus was declared the rightful king. Set was not destroyed. He was given dominion over the desert and storms, the wild places beyond civilization. He even had a role protecting Ra during the nightly journey through the underworld. The Egyptians understood that chaos couldn't be eliminated, only contained and channeled, that Set's destructive energy had its place in the cosmic order. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, was the guardian of the dead, the one who supervised mummification and guided souls through the underworld. Jackals were common in Egyptian cemeteries, scavenging among the graves, and the Egyptians transformed this potentially threatening presence into a protective deity. Anubis was the one who weighed the heart of the deceased against the feather of Ma'at in the Hall of Judgment. He was present at every funeral, invoked in every burial ritual, the psychopomp who ensured safe passage from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. His image, a black jackal or a man with a jackal's head, stood guard over tombs, a promise that the dead were protected, that the journey to the afterlife would be successful. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing and magic, was the divine scribe, the inventor of hieroglyphs, the keeper of knowledge. He was the moon god, the measurer of time, the one who recorded the judgment of souls in the afterlife. Scribes considered Thoth their patron, invoking him before beginning any writing. He represented the power of knowledge, the magic of words, the ability to shape reality through language and record. In a civilization where literacy was rare and powerful, where writing was considered a sacred art, Thoth was essential, the god who made civilization possible by giving humans the tools to record, to remember, to transmit knowledge across generations. Thoth was also the mediator between opposing forces, the god of balance and equilibrium. When Horus and Set fought, Thoth healed their wounds. When the cosmic order was threatened, Thoth used his wisdom to restore it. He was depicted either as an ibis or as a baboon, both animals associated with intelligence and observation. The ibis, with its curved beak resembling a crescent moon, connected Thoth to the lunar cycles and the measurement of time. The baboons that greeted the sunrise with their calls were seen as worshippers of the sun, and thus sacred to Thoth. Hathor was the goddess of love, beauty, music, and joy, often depicted as a cow or as a woman with cow's horns cradling the sun disk. She was the divine mother, the nurturer, but also the goddess of drunkenness and celebration. Her festivals were occasions for music, dancing, and drinking, for the celebration of life's pleasures. But Hathor had a darker aspect. She could transform into Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war and plague, the fierce destroyer who nearly annihilated humanity before being tricked into drinking beer dyed red to look like blood, which made her drunk and pacified her. This duality, nurturing mother and fierce destroyer, reflected the Egyptian understanding that the same forces that give life can also take it away, that the divine is both creative and destructive. Ma'at was not just a goddess, but a concept: truth, justice, balance, cosmic order. She was depicted as a woman with an ostrich feather on her head, and that feather became the symbol of truth itself. In the afterlife, the heart of the deceased was weighed against Ma'at's feather. If the heart was lighter than the feather, if the person had lived according to truth and justice, they were granted eternal life. If the heart was heavier, weighted down by sin and wrongdoing, it was devoured by Ammit, a demon who was part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, and the soul ceased to exist. Ma'at represented the fundamental Egyptian belief that the universe operated according to principles of balance and order, and that human behavior mattered cosmically. Living according to Ma'at wasn't just moral, it was necessary for the continued functioning of reality itself. Bastet, the cat goddess, was the protector of the home, the goddess of fertility, joy, and music. Cats were sacred to Bastet, and killing a cat, even accidentally, was a serious crime. Families kept cats as pets and as protectors against vermin. And when a beloved cat died, the family would go into mourning, shaving their eyebrows as a sign of grief. Cats were mummified and buried in special cemeteries, sometimes with mummified mice to sustain them in the afterlife. The city of Bubastis was Bastet's cult center, and her annual festival was one of the most popular in Egypt, drawing hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who came to celebrate with music, dancing, and wine. Sobek, the crocodile god, embodied the Nile's dual nature, life-giving but also dangerous. Crocodiles were feared predators, but they were also associated with the fertility of the river, with the power of water. Sobek was worshipped particularly in the Fayum region, where crocodiles were abundant. Sacred crocodiles were kept in temple pools, fed choice meats, adorned with jewelry, treated as living manifestations of the god. When they died, they were mummified with the same care as humans. Sobek represented the Egyptian ability to transform fear into reverence, to find the divine even in the dangerous and the deadly. Ptah was the creator god of Memphis, the divine craftsman who created the world through thought and speech. Unlike other creation myths, where the world emerged from chaos or was born from a cosmic egg, Ptah conceived of creation in his heart and brought it into being by speaking it aloud. This made Ptah, the patron of craftsmen, artists, and architects, all those who transform ideas into physical reality. The high priest of Ptah held the title greatest of the controllers of craftsmen, and the god was invoked at the beginning of any construction project, from the humblest house to the grandest temple. The night sky was a sacred text for the Egyptians, a map of divine order written in stars. They identified constellations, tracked the movements of planets, used the stars to mark time and seasons. The goddess Nut was the sky itself, her body arching over the earth, swallowing the sun each evening and giving birth to it each morning. The Milky Way was seen as a celestial Nile, a river in the sky where the gods sailed. Orion was associated with Osiris, Sirius with Isis, the heliacal rising of Sirius. Its first appearance in the dawn sky after a period of invisibility coincided with the beginning of the Nile's flood and marked the Egyptian New Year. The stars were not just beautiful, they were functional, divine, essential for navigation, agriculture, and religious ritual. The Egyptians believed that the universe was constantly threatened by chaos, by the forces of Isfet disorder, injustice, untruth. The gods worked continuously to maintain Ma'at, to keep chaos at bay, but they needed human help. Every ritual performed, every offering made, every act of justice and truth strengthened Ma'at and pushed back against chaos. This gave human life cosmic significance. You weren't just living for yourself or your family, you were participating in the maintenance of universal order. Your actions mattered not just morally, but metaphysically. The world continued to exist because the gods and humans worked together to make it so. And so tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself standing in an Egyptian temple at night. The air is cool, scented with incense, myrrh and frankincense burning in bronze braziers. Above you, the sky is impossibly clear, stars scattered like grains of sand across the darkness. You can see Orion, the celestial form of Osiris, and Sirius, bright and steady, the star of Isis. The priests are chanting, their voices rising and falling in rhythms older than memory, performing the rituals that ensure the sun will rise tomorrow, that the Nile will flood, that order will prevail over chaos. You're part of something vast, something that connects earth to sky, past to future, human to divine. The gods are not distant, they're here, in the river and the stars, in the bread you ate and the linen you wear, in every breath and heartbeat. Let that connection hold you now. Let the ancient certainty that the universe is ordered, that the gods are watching, that your life has meaning in the cosmic scheme. Let that settle over you like a blanket. The sun will rise tomorrow because Ra will triumph over Apophis. The stars will wheel overhead in their eternal patterns. And you, safe in this moment, can rest, knowing that the gods are doing their work, that the universe is unfolding as it should. Sleep now, under the protection of Anubis, under the gaze of Nut, under the eternal watch of the divine. You are safe. You are held. You are part of the eternal story. The Egyptians understood that knowledge was power, that the ability to read and write, to heal and calculate, to record and remember set humans apart from animals and brought them closer to the gods. Literacy was rare. Perhaps only 1% of the population could read and write. But those who could, the scribes held positions of enormous prestige and influence. They were the keepers of knowledge, the administrators of the state, the preservers of history. And beyond writing, the Egyptians developed sophisticated medical practices, mathematical systems, and astronomical observations that would influence civilizations for millennia to come. Tonight, we enter the House of Life, the temple scriptorium, where knowledge was created, copied, and preserved, where the wisdom of generations was inscribed on papyrus and stone, ensuring that what was learned would not be forgotten. Hieroglyphs, the sacred writing of ancient Egypt, were more than just a system for recording language. The word hieroglyph comes from the Greek meaning sacred carvings, and that's exactly what they were. A writing system believed to be a gift from Thoth himself, imbued with magical power. Each hieroglyph was a small work of art, a carefully drawn image of a bird, a person, a tool, a plant. There were over 700 different signs in the hieroglyphic system, some representing sounds, others representing whole words or concepts. Writing hieroglyphs required years of training, a steady hand, an artistic eye, and deep knowledge of grammar, vocabulary, and religious symbolism. The signs weren't just functional, they were beautiful, transforming every inscription into a work of art, every text into a visual feast. Hieroglyphs were used primarily for sacred and monumental purposes, carved into temple walls, inscribed on tomb chambers, written in religious texts. For everyday administrative and business purposes, the Egyptians developed hieratic script, a cursive, simplified version of hieroglyphs that could be written quickly with a reed brush on papyrus. Later, an even more abbreviated script called demotic emerged for common use. But hieroglyphs remained the language of the gods, the script of eternity, reserved for communications with the divine and for texts meant to last forever. The very act of writing hieroglyphs was considered a sacred art, a way of participating in the divine order, of making thought permanent and visible. The training of a scribe began in childhood and was rigorous, demanding, sometimes brutal. Students sat in schools attached to temples or government offices, copying texts over and over, memorizing thousands of hieroglyphic signs, learning grammar, mathematics, and proper forms of address. Teachers were strict, and beatings for poor performance were common. But the reward for those who persevered was immense. A scribe would never have to perform manual labor, would have access to power and wealth, would be respected and honored. A famous text called The Satire of the Trades was copied by students as a writing exercise, and it described the miseries of every profession. The farmer covered in mud, the fisherman facing crocodiles, the metal worker breathing toxic fumes, while praising the scribe's life as comfortable, clean, and prestigious. Be a scribe, the text urged, and your limbs will be sleek, your hands will grow soft. Scribes were essential to the functioning of Egyptian civilization. They recorded tax assessments, inventoried temple goods, copied religious texts, wrote letters for the illiterate, kept accounts, documented legal proceedings, and preserved literature. Without scribes, there would be no administration, no historical record, no transmission of knowledge across generations. They were the memory of the civilization, the ones who ensured that what happened today would be known tomorrow, that the words of the gods and the deeds of pharaohs would not be lost to time. In their hands, fragile papyrus became more durable than stone, because words, once written and copied and recopied, could survive the destruction of any single monument. Egyptian medicine was remarkably advanced for its time, combining practical observation with magical ritual in ways that modern minds find difficult to reconcile, but that made perfect sense to the Egyptians. Physicians were specialists. There were doctors for the eyes, for the stomach, for the teeth, for internal diseases. They understood anatomy from the practice of mummification, which required removing and preserving internal organs. They knew that the heart was central to the circulatory system, that the pulse could be felt in various parts of the body, that the heart's rhythm was connected to health. They performed surgeries, set broken bones, stitched wounds, and prescribed medicines made from plants, minerals, and animal products. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, but likely copied from much older sources, is one of the oldest surgical texts in existence. It describes 48 cases of injuries and diseases, organized from head to toe, with each case following a systematic format: title, examination, diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. The text is remarkably rational and empirical, describing symptoms, recommending treatments, and honestly acknowledging when a condition is beyond the physician's ability to cure. For a fractured skull, the text might say, "An ailment not to be treated," a frank admission of medical limitations. But for treatable conditions, it provides detailed instructions: how to stitch a wound, how to set a broken collarbone, how to treat a dislocated jaw. This wasn't superstition. This was evidence-based medicine, observation and experience codified and transmitted. But Egyptian medicine also included magical elements that were inseparable from the physical treatments. Spells and incantations were recited while administering medicine. Amulets were prescribed alongside herbs, and the physician often worked in conjunction with a priest. This wasn't ignorance. It was a different understanding of causation. The Egyptians believed that illness could have both physical and spiritual causes, that a demon might be responsible for a fever, that a curse might cause pain. Treating the body without addressing the spiritual dimension would be incomplete, ineffective. The physician healed the body, the magic healed the soul. Both were necessary for true recovery. Egyptian physicians used an impressive pharmacopoeia of natural remedies. Honey was used as an antibiotic for wounds, and modern science has confirmed that honey does indeed have antibacterial properties. Willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, was used to reduce pain and inflammation. Garlic was prescribed for heart conditions and to boost strength. Castor oil was used as a laxative. Frankincense and myrrh had antiseptic properties. The Egyptians didn't understand the biochemical mechanisms, but through trial and error, observation and experience, they discovered treatments that actually worked, that relieved suffering and saved lives. Dentistry was practiced in ancient Egypt, though it was often a matter of managing problems rather than preventing them. The Egyptian diet, with bread contaminated by sand from grinding stones, wore down teeth and caused abscesses, infections, and severe pain. Dental problems were common and could be life-threatening if infections spread. Dentists could extract teeth, drain abscesses, and prescribe pain-relieving mixtures. Some mummies show evidence of dental work, holes drilled to drain infections, wires used to stabilize loose teeth. It was primitive by modern standards, but it was dentistry nonetheless, an attempt to alleviate one of the most common sources of human suffering. Mathematics in ancient Egypt was practical, developed to solve real-world problems, calculating the area of fields for taxation, determining the volume of granaries, computing the slope of a pyramid, dividing rations among workers. The Egyptians used a decimal system based on powers of 10, with different hieroglyphs representing 1, 10, 100, 1000, and so on. They could add, subtract, multiply, and divide, though their methods were different from ours. Multiplication, for instance, was done through repeated doubling and adding. To multiply 13 by 7, they would double 13 repeatedly. 13, 26, 52, 104, and then add the appropriate doublings to reach the answer. 13 plus 26 plus 52 equals 91. The Rind mathematical papyrus, dating to around 1550 BCE, is one of our best sources for understanding Egyptian mathematics. It contains 84 problems with solutions, covering topics like fractions, algebra, geometry, and practical calculations. Problem 50 asks how to calculate the area of a circular field with a diameter of 9 units. The solution uses a value for pi that's approximately 3.16, remarkably close to the true value of 3.14159. The Egyptians didn't have the concept of pi as we understand it. but they had discovered through practical experience a method that gave accurate results. Their mathematics was empirical, functional, sufficient for building pyramids and managing an empire. Egyptian astronomy was intimately connected to religion and agriculture. The priests observed the stars, tracked the movements of planets, identified constellations, and used this knowledge to create calendars and predict the Nile's flood. The Egyptian calendar was one of the first solar calendars, dividing the year into 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 extra days added at the end. This 365-day calendar was remarkably accurate, though it didn't account for the extra quarter day in the actual solar year, so it gradually drifted out of sync with the seasons over centuries. But for practical purposes, for organizing agricultural work and religious festivals, it was more than adequate. The Egyptians recognized 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and called them stars that know no rest, because they moved against the background of fixed stars. They tracked these wandering stars, noted their positions, incorporated them into their cosmology. Venus, the morning and evening star, was associated with the god Horus in his aspect as the divine falcon. The movements of celestial bodies were seen as divine actions, the gods literally moving through the sky, and understanding these movements was a way of understanding divine will. The concept of the Deccan stars, 36 star groups that rose heliacally at 10-day intervals throughout the year, was used to tell time at night. By observing which decan was rising, priests could determine the hour, allowing them to perform rituals at the correct times, even in darkness. This was essential for temple service, which required offerings and prayers at specific hours of the day and night. The Egyptians were among the first to divide the night into hours, creating a system of timekeeping that would eventually evolve into our modern 24-hour day. The House of Life, the Per-Ankh, was the temple scriptorium and library where sacred texts were composed, copied, and stored. It was a place of learning, where priests studied medicine, magic, astronomy, and theology. The House of Life was where new religious texts were written, where old texts were preserved, where the accumulated wisdom of the civilization was maintained. Access was restricted. This was sacred knowledge, not for the uninitiated, but within its walls, the intellectual life of Egypt flourished. Knowledge was created and transmitted, and the connection between human learning and divine wisdom was maintained. And so tonight, as sleep begins to claim you, imagine yourself in the quiet of a temple scriptorium. The air is cool, the only light coming from oil lamps that cast warm, flickering shadows on the walls. A scribe sits cross-legged on a mat, a sheet of papyrus stretched across his lap, a reed brush in his hand. He dips the brush in black ink made from soot and water, and with careful, practiced strokes, he draws a hieroglyph: a seated man, a bird in flight, a ripple of water. Each sign is perfect, beautiful, a small act of creation. The knowledge he's recording, a medical treatment, a mathematical formula, a prayer to the gods, will outlast him, will be copied by other scribes, will be read by people not yet born. He is making thought permanent, giving words the durability of stone. Let that quiet dedication settle over you now. Let the scratch of brush on papyrus, the smell of ink and lamp oil, the cool silence of the scriptorium carry you into sleep. The knowledge is being preserved. The wisdom is being transmitted. And you, in this moment, are connected to that ancient chain of learning, that unbroken line of humans trying to understand, to remember, to pass on what they've learned. to those who come after. Rest now in the house of life, where knowledge is sacred and words are eternal. The scribes are doing their work, the wisdom is safe, and you can sleep knowing that what matters will not be forgotten. Death was not the end for the ancient Egyptians. It was a transformation, a journey, a passage from one form of existence to another. They believed that each person possessed multiple souls, the Ka, a life force that needed sustenance, the Ba, a personality that could move between the worlds of the living and the dead, and the Ak, the transfigured spirit that could dwell among the gods, preserving the body through mummification, providing it with food and drink, equipping the tomb with everything needed for the afterlife. These weren't superstitions. They were practical preparations for a journey that every Egyptian expected to make, a voyage through the underworld to reach the field of reeds, a paradise where the blessed dead would live forever in peace and abundance. Tonight, we walk with them through that journey, through the rituals and beliefs that made death not an ending, but a beginning. Mummification was the sacred art of preserving the body for eternity, a process that took 70 days and required the skills of specialized priests and embalmers. The body was taken to the Per-Nefer, the House of Beauty, a workshop usually located on the west bank of the Nile, the side of the setting sun, the realm of the dead. The first step was to remove the internal organs, which would decay rapidly in Egypt's heat. The embalmers made an incision in the left side of the abdomen and carefully removed the stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs. These organs were preserved separately in canopic jars, each protected by one of the 4 sons of Horus. The heart, however, was left in place. It would be needed in the afterlife for the judgment, when it would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. The brain was removed through the nose using a long bronze hook, a delicate and gruesome procedure that required skill and patience. The embalmers would break through the ethmoid bone, insert the hook, and carefully extract the brain matter in pieces. The Egyptians didn't understand the brain's function. They believed consciousness resided in the heart, so the brain was discarded, considered unimportant. It's one of history's great ironies that they preserved the body with such care, but threw away the organ we now know contains everything that makes a person who they are. But they were working with the knowledge they had, and by their understanding, they were doing everything necessary to ensure eternal life. After the organs were removed, the body was packed and covered with natron, a naturally occurring salt that absorbed moisture and prevented decay. The body would remain buried in natron for 40 days, slowly desiccating, the tissues drying and hardening. This was the crucial step. Moisture was the enemy of preservation, and the natron drew it out completely, leaving the body dry, stable, resistant to decomposition. After 40 days, the natron was removed, and the body was washed, anointed with oils and resins, and prepared for wrapping. The wrapping of the mummy was a ritual as much as a practical procedure, accompanied by prayers and incantations at every stage. The embalmers used hundreds of yards of linen strips, wrapping each finger and toe individually, then the limbs, then the torso, creating layer upon layer of fabric. Between the layers they placed amulets, scarabs, jed pillars, eyes of Horus, figures of gods, each one inscribed with protective spells. These amulets would guard the deceased during the dangerous journey through the underworld, would provide magical protection against demons and dangers. The wrapping took days, each layer carefully positioned, each amulet placed precisely according to ritual requirements. The final layer was often a shroud, sometimes painted with images of the deceased or with religious scenes. The wrapped mummy was then placed in a coffin, and for the wealthy, that coffin might be placed inside one or more additional coffins, each more elaborate than the last. The innermost coffin was often shaped like a human, painted with the face of the deceased, inscribed with spells and prayers. The outer coffins might be rectangular, decorated with images of gods, protective symbols, and texts from the Book of the Dead. The coffin was a house for the deceased, a protective shell, a vehicle for the journey to the afterlife. It was painted, carved, gilded, made as beautiful and as magically potent as the family could afford. The funeral itself was the elaborate ceremony, a public display of grief and a crucial ritual for ensuring the deceased's successful transition to the afterlife. The mummy, in its coffin, was placed on a sledge and dragged by oxen to the tomb, accompanied by professional mourners who wailed and threw dust on their heads, by priests who recited prayers and burned incense, by family members who carried offerings of food, drink, and precious objects. At the tomb entrance, the most important ritual took place, the opening of the mouth ceremony. A priest, wearing the mask of Anubis, would touch the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose with special ritual tools, symbolically restoring the deceased's ability to see, hear, speak, breathe, and eat in the afterlife. Without this ceremony, the mummy would be helpless, unable to function. With it, the deceased was reanimated, ready to begin the journey. The tomb was not just a burial place, it was a home for eternity, equipped with everything the deceased might need. The walls were painted with scenes of daily life, of harvests and banquets, of servants and animals, creating a magical reality that the deceased could inhabit. There were models of boats, of granaries, of bakeries and breweries, of servants performing tasks. These weren't toys. They were magical substitutes that would come to life in the afterlife, ensuring that the deceased would never lack for food, drink, or service. There were shabti figures, small mummiform statues inscribed with spells that would animate them to perform labor on behalf of the deceased in the afterlife. The wealthy might be buried with hundreds of shabtis, one for each day of the year, plus overseers to direct them. Food offerings were essential. The ka, the life force, needed sustenance, and the living had an obligation to provide it. Families would bring bread, beer, meat, vegetables, and fruit to the tomb, placing them on offering tables, reciting prayers that magically transferred the essence of the food to the deceased. But the Egyptians were practical. They knew that families might forget, that offerings might cease after a few generations. So they inscribed offering formulas on the tomb walls, magical texts that would ensure eternal sustenance even if no physical offerings were made. The words themselves had power, could create what they described. A painted image of bread and beer, accompanied by the right spell, would provide nourishment forever. The journey through the underworld, the duat, was perilous, filled with obstacles and dangers that the deceased had to overcome. The Book of the Dead, actually a collection of spells and instructions rather than a single book, was placed in the tomb to serve as a guidebook. It contained spells for transforming into different animals, for passing through gates guarded by demons, for navigating lakes of fire, for defeating serpents and hostile spirits. Each spell had to be recited correctly. Each gate required the right password. Each challenge demanded specific knowledge. This is why the wealthy paid scribes to create personalized copies of the Book of the Dead, inscribed on papyrus scrolls or painted on coffins and tomb walls. The spells were insurance, magical tools that would help the deceased navigate the dangers of the afterlife. The climax of the journey was the weighing of the heart, the judgment that determined whether the deceased was worthy of eternal life. In the Hall of Two Truths, before Osiris and 42 divine judges, the deceased's heart was placed on one side of a scale, with the feather of Ma'at on the other. The heart contained the record of the person's life, all their deeds, good and bad. If the heart was lighter than the feather, if the person had lived according to truth and justice, they passed the test and were granted eternal life in the field of reeds. But if the heart was heavy with sin, it would tip the scales, and Ammit, the devourer, would consume it, and the person would cease to exist, suffering the second death, from which there was no return. Before the weighing, the deceased had to recite the negative confession, a declaration of innocence listing 42 sins they had not committed. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not told lies. I have not caused pain. I have not made anyone weep. This wasn't a confession of guilt, but an assertion of innocence, a claim to have lived according to Ma'at. Whether the deceased had actually lived a blameless life was less important than knowing the right words to say. The ritual had its own power, its own efficacy. The Egyptians believed in the magical power of words, that saying something made it true, that the proper formula could transform reality. For those who passed the judgment, the reward was the field of reeds, the Aru, a paradise that was essentially an idealized version of Egypt. The field of reeds was a place of abundant harvests, where grain grew taller than a person, where the Nile always flooded at the right time, where there was no hunger, no thirst, no pain, no death. The blessed dead would farm their fields, tend their gardens, enjoy feasts and festivals, reunite with loved ones who had gone before. It was eternal life, but not a static, boring eternity. It was active, productive, social, a continuation of the best aspects of earthly life, without any of the suffering. The concept of the Ba is particularly beautiful. It was depicted as a human-headed bird, representing the personality and mobility of the deceased. The Ba could leave the tomb, could fly up to the world of the living, could visit familiar places, could receive offerings from family members. But it had to return to the mummy each night, had to reunite with the body. This is why preserving the body was so crucial. The Ba needed a home, a physical anchor. Without the mummy, the Ba would be lost, homeless, unable to achieve the full existence of the afterlife. The Ba was the part of you that remained distinctly you, that carried your memories, your personality, your essence. The Ah was the transfigured spirit, the form the deceased took after successfully passing through the underworld and being judged worthy. The Ak was powerful, luminous, capable of interacting with the gods, of influencing events in the world of the living. The Ak could be invoked by the living, could be asked for help, for protection, for intercession with the gods. Letters to the dead have been found, written on pottery or papyrus, placed in tombs, asking deceased family members to solve problems, to stop causing trouble, to protect the living. The boundary between the living and the dead was permeable. The dead were still part of the community, still accessible, still able to affect the world they had left behind. And so tonight, as you feel yourself sinking deeper into sleep, imagine yourself in an Egyptian tomb, but not as a place of fear or darkness. The walls are painted with bright colors, blue and gold, red and green, depicting gardens and rivers, feasts and festivals, all the good things of life. There are offerings on the table, bread and beer, figs and dates, roasted duck and fresh lettuce. The air smells of incense, of myrrh and frankincense. You are not alone. Your car is here, Your bar is here, all the parts of yourself gathered together, whole and complete. Outside, beyond the tomb, the journey awaits. But you are prepared. You know the spells. You have the amulets. You have lived according to Ma'at. The weighing of the heart holds no fear. Your heart is light, unburdened, ready to balance against the feather. And beyond the judgment lies the field of reeds, where the grain grows tall and the water is always cool and clear, where there is no more pain, no more fear, no more ending. Let that promise of eternal peace settle over you now. Let the ancient certainty that death is not the end, that you will continue, that you will be reunited with those you love, in a place of beauty and abundance. Let that comfort you as you drift toward sleep. The journey is long, but the destination is worth it, and you, like every Egyptian who came before, are equipped for the voyage. Rest now in the house of eternity, where the walls are painted with life and the offerings never cease. You are safe. You are prepared. And when the time comes, you will pass through the gates, will speak the words of power, will stand before Osiris with a light heart. But that time is not yet. For now, there is only this: the quiet of the tomb, the smell of incense, the painted images of paradise. Sleep now and dream of the field of reeds. The Egyptians lived in intimate proximity with animals, sharing the Nile Valley with creatures both familiar and exotic, mundane and magnificent. But they didn't see animals as lesser beings, as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be overcome. Animals were sacred, manifestations of divine power, teachers, companions, and sometimes gods themselves. The cat curled by the hearth was sacred to Bastet. The ibis stalking through the marshes was the earthly form of Thoth. The scarab beetle rolling its ball of dung was a symbol of the sun god's daily rebirth. Every creature had its place in the cosmic order, its role in the great tapestry of existence. Tonight we walk among them, these sacred animals of ancient Egypt, and discover what they meant to a civilization that saw divinity in feathers and fur, in scales and shells. Cats held a special place in Egyptian hearts and homes, revered as sacred to the goddess Bastet, but also valued for their practical role as hunters of mice and rats that threatened grain stores. The Egyptian word for cat was mew or mute, onomatopoetic words that mimicked the sound cats make, suggesting that the Egyptians, like us, heard their meows as a form of communication. Cats were kept as beloved pets, given names, allowed to roam freely through homes, fed choice morsels from the family table. When a household cat died, the family would go into mourning, shaving their eyebrows as a visible sign of grief. The cat would be mummified, wrapped in linen, sometimes placed in elaborate bronze or wooden coffins shaped like seated cats, and buried in special cat cemeteries. At Bubastis, the cult center of Bastet, archaeologists have found literally hundreds of thousands of mummified cats, evidence of the depth of devotion these animals inspired. The penalty for killing a cat, even accidentally, could be death. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, described witnessing a mob kill a Roman who had accidentally run over a cat with his chariot, despite the pharaoh's attempts to intervene and save him. Whether this account is entirely accurate or somewhat exaggerated, it reflects the genuine reverence Egyptians felt for cats. These weren't just useful animals. They were sacred beings, protected by divine law, worthy of honor and respect. The cat's grace, its hunting prowess, its mysterious independence, its role as protector of the home, All of these qualities made it a fitting symbol for Bastet, the goddess of joy, music, and domestic harmony. The ibis, a long-legged wading bird with a distinctive curved beak, was sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. Ibises were common in the marshes and along the Nile, and their patient, methodical hunting, standing motionless, then striking with sudden precision, was seen as emblematic of the careful, deliberate nature of wisdom and learning. The ibis's black and white plumage was associated with the moon, which Thoth governed, and with the duality of knowledge, light and dark, known and unknown. Millions of ibises were mummified and offered at temples dedicated to Thoth, particularly at Hermopolis, his cult center. These weren't wild birds that died naturally. They were raised in temple aviaries specifically for this purpose, bred, fed, and eventually killed and mummified as offerings to the god. It seems cruel by modern standards, but for the Egyptians, it was an act of devotion, a way of honoring Thoth by returning his sacred birds to him. Baboons were also sacred to Thoth, and they appear frequently in Egyptian art, often shown in poses of adoration, raising their arms toward the rising sun. This artistic convention was based on actual baboon behavior. Baboons do greet the sunrise with vocalizations and gestures that look remarkably like worship. The Egyptians interpreted this as the baboon's recognition of the sun god's power, as animals wise enough to honor the divine. Baboons were kept in temples, treated with reverence, and when they died, they were mummified and buried with honors. Their intelligence, their social complexity, their apparent worship of the sun, all of these made baboons fitting companions for Thoth, the god of wisdom. The scarab beetle, specifically the dung beetle that rolls balls of dung across the sand, became one of the most powerful symbols in Egyptian religion. The Egyptians observed these beetles rolling their dung balls and saw in this behavior a parallel to the sun's journey across the sky. Just as the beetle pushed its ball from east to west, so too did the sun god Khepri push the sun across the heavens. The scarab became a symbol of transformation, rebirth, and the eternal cycle of renewal. Scarab amulets were worn by the living for protection and placed on the hearts of mummies to ensure resurrection. The underside of these amulets was often inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, particularly the spell that prevented the heart from testifying against the deceased during the judgment. The humble dung beetle, through the Egyptian lens, became a symbol of the sun god himself, of the daily miracle of dawn, of the promise that what dies will be reborn. Crocodiles were both feared and worshipped, embodying the Nile's dual nature as giver of life and bringer of death. Sobek, the crocodile god, was worshipped throughout Egypt, but especially in regions where crocodiles were abundant. Sacred crocodiles were kept in temple pools, fed offerings of meat and bread, adorned with gold jewelry and precious stones. Priests would swim with these crocodiles, demonstrating their faith and the god's protection. When a sacred crocodile died, it was mummified with great ceremony and buried in special crocodile necropolises. At Kom Ombo, a temple dedicated jointly to Sobek and Horus, archaeologists have found hundreds of mummified crocodiles ranging from tiny hatchlings to massive adults over 15 feet long. The Egyptians didn't fear crocodiles less because they worshipped them. They transformed their fear into reverence, made the dangerous sacred, and in doing so, found a way to live alongside one of the Nile's most formidable predators. Hippos presented a paradox. They were dangerous, aggressive, responsible for more human deaths than any other large animal in Egypt. But they were also associated with Tauret, the hippopotamus goddess who protected women in childbirth. Taweret was depicted as a pregnant hippo standing upright, often holding the Sa symbol of protection. She was fierce, maternal, a guardian who would destroy anything that threatened mothers and children. The hippo's aggression, its willingness to attack anything that came too close, was reinterpreted as protective instinct, as the fierce love of a mother defending her young. Amulets of Taweret were common, worn by pregnant women, placed in homes, invoked during labor. The dangerous hippo became a symbol of safety, of the protective power that emerges from love. Falcons and hawks were sacred to Horus, the sky god whose eyes were the sun and moon. The falcon's ability to soar high above the earth, to see with incredible clarity, to strike with devastating speed and precision. All of these qualities made it a fitting symbol for divine kingship and celestial power. The pharaoh was the living Horus, and falcon imagery was everywhere in royal iconography. Sacred falcons were kept at temples, mummified when they died, buried with honors. The falcon represented the connection between earth and sky, between human and divine, between the temporal power of the pharaoh and the eternal authority of the gods. Cobras, despite being deadly, were sacred and protective. The uraeus, the rearing cobra, was worn on the pharaoh's crown as a symbol of sovereignty and divine protection. The cobra goddess Wadjet was the protector of Lower Egypt, and her image on the royal crown signified the pharaoh's rule over the northern kingdom. The cobra's venom, which could kill, was reinterpreted as a weapon against the pharaoh's enemies, a divine fire that would destroy anyone who threatened the king. The snake that could kill became the snake that protected, its danger transformed into a defensive power wielded on behalf of order and justice. Bulls were symbols of strength, fertility, and royal power. The Apis bull, a living bull selected for specific markings and kept at Memphis, was worshipped as a manifestation of Ptah and later associated with Osiris. The Apis bull lived in luxury, housed in special quarters, fed the finest food, attended by priests. When it died, all of Egypt went into mourning, and the bull was mummified and buried in the Serapeum, a vast underground necropolis at Saqqara, where massive stone sarcophagi held the mummified remains of generations of Apis bulls. The search for a new Apis bull would begin immediately. Priests traveling throughout Egypt, looking for a calf with the right markings, a white triangle on the forehead, an eagle shape on the back, specific patterns on the hide. When the new Apis was found, it was brought to Memphis with great celebration, and the cycle continued. Lions represented royal power and divine strength. The pharaoh was often compared to a lion fierce in battle, protective of his people. Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, was the embodiment of divine wrath, the destroyer of enemies, the bringer of plague. But she was also a healer. Her priests were physicians, and she could cure the diseases she caused. The lion's power was absolute, terrifying, but also protective when directed toward the right ends. Lions were not native to the Nile Valley, but lived in the desert margins, and they were hunted by pharaohs as a demonstration of royal courage and strength. To kill a lion was to prove oneself worthy of kingship, to demonstrate mastery over the most powerful of beasts. Even smaller creatures had sacred significance. The frog, because it appeared in great numbers after the Nile's flood, was associated with fertility and rebirth, and the goddess Heket, who assisted at births, was depicted with a frog's head. The bee was sacred, associated with Lower Egypt, and honey was valued both as food and as medicine. The goose was sacred to Geb, the earth god, and geese were raised for food, but also for ritual purposes. The fish of the Nile were generally eaten, but certain species were sacred in certain regions and forbidden as food. The Egyptians lived in a world alive with meaning, where every creature, from the mightiest crocodile to the smallest beetle, had its place in the divine order. And so tonight, as sleep draws near, imagine yourself walking along the Nile at dusk. The air is cooling, the light turning golden. An ibis stands in the shallows, perfectly still, then strikes, pulling a fish from the water. A cat emerges from the papyrus reeds, pauses to groom itself, then continues on its mysterious errands. Overhead, a falcon circles, riding the thermals, its keen eyes scanning the earth below. In the distance, you hear the bellow of a hippo, the splash as it submerges. All around you, life teems. Insects and birds, fish and mammals, each one going about its existence, each one sacred, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of creation. The Egyptians understood something we've largely forgotten, that we share this world with countless other beings, that we are not separate from nature, but part of it, that the divine is present not just in temples and texts, but in fur and feathers, in the patient hunting of the ibis and the fierce protection of the hippo mother. Let that understanding settle over you now. Let the knowledge that you are part of something larger, something ancient, something that includes every living creature. Let that carry you into sleep. The cat is curled by the hearth. The scarab is rolling its ball toward tomorrow's sunrise. The falcon is settling on its perch for the night. And you, like them, are exactly where you belong, part of the eternal cycle, safe in the knowledge that the world is alive, sacred, and full of meaning. Rest now among the creatures of the sands, under the protection of Bastet and Thoth, Sobek and Horus. You are not alone. You never were. Nothing lasts forever, not even Egypt. For 3,000 years the civilization endured, longer than any empire before or since, longer than Rome, longer than any modern nation has yet survived. 30 dynasties of pharaohs rose and fell, the Nile flooded and receded. The pyramids stood silent witness to the passage of centuries. But eventually the old gods grew quiet, the temples emptied, the hieroglyphs became unreadable mysteries, and Egypt became a province of foreign empires, a memory of vanished glory. Yet even in decline, even in ruin, there is a strange and melancholy beauty. The temples still stand, weathered but unbroken. The tombs still hold their secrets. The desert has reclaimed much, but not everything. Tonight, we walk among the ruins, trace the long, slow sunset of Egyptian civilization, and find in that ending not despair, but a kind of peace. The peace that comes from knowing that even the mightiest works of humanity return, eventually, to sand and silence. The Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders, lasted from approximately 2686 to 2181 BCE, a period of unprecedented stability and achievement. This was when the Great Pyramids were built, when Egyptian art and architecture reached heights that would never quite be matched again. But even this golden age ended, collapsing into a period of chaos and fragmentation, called the First Intermediate Period. The reasons are still debated: climate change that reduced the Nile's floods, political fragmentation, economic collapse, the weakening of central authority. Whatever the causes, the unified kingdom fractured. Rival dynasties claimed power in different regions, and for over a century, Egypt was divided, struggling, diminished. The pyramids stood empty, monuments to a glory that seemed irretrievable. But the Egyptians endured, and eventually the Middle Kingdom emerged, reunifying the land, restoring order, building anew. The Middle Kingdom, from approximately 2055 to 1650 BCE, was a renaissance, a recovery of lost greatness. Literature flourished during this period. Some of Egypt's finest poetry and wisdom texts were composed. Trade expanded, reaching deep into Africa and across the Mediterranean. But this too ended, this time through foreign invasion. The Hyksos, a Semitic people from the Levant, infiltrated the Delta, established their own dynasty, and ruled Lower Egypt for over a century. For the Egyptians, this was traumatic. Foreign rulers on the throne of Horus, foreigners in the sacred land. But even this humiliation became a source of renewal. The Theban princes of Upper Egypt eventually drove out the Hyksos, reunified Egypt, and inaugurated the new kingdom, the most powerful and expansive period in Egyptian history. The New Kingdom, from approximately 1550 to 1077 BCE, was Egypt's imperial age. Pharaohs like Thutmose III and Ramesses II led armies into Syria and Palestine, establishing an empire that stretched from Nubia in the south to the Euphrates in the north. Wealth poured into Egypt, gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, tribute from conquered peoples. The temples at Karnak and Luxor were expanded to massive proportions, their columns like forests of stone, their walls covered with hieroglyphs and reliefs depicting the pharaoh's victories. This was the age of Tutankhamun, whose intact tomb would be discovered millennia later, revealing the incredible wealth and artistry of the period. This was the age of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who tried to replace Egypt's traditional gods with worship of a single deity, the Aten, the sun disk. His revolution failed. After his death, the old gods were restored, his monuments were destroyed, his name was erased from king lists. But the attempt itself reveals the dynamism of the period, the willingness to question even the most fundamental aspects of Egyptian religion. Ramesses II, who reigned for 66 years in the 13th century BCE, was perhaps the last truly great pharaoh, a builder and warrior who covered Egypt with monuments bearing his name. The temples at Abu Simbel, carved into a cliff face in Nubia, with 4 colossal statues of Ramesses seated at the entrance, each over 60 feet tall. These were statements of power, declarations that Egypt was eternal, that the pharaoh was a god among gods. But even Ramesses could not stop the slow decline that was beginning. Egypt faced invasions from the sea peoples, mysterious raiders who destroyed civilizations throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Egyptian empire contracted, wealth diminished, central authority weakened. After Ramesses, the new kingdom limped on for another century before collapsing into the Third Intermediate Period, another era of division and foreign rule. The late period saw Egypt ruled by a succession of foreign dynasties: Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians. Each brought their own customs, their own gods, but each also adopted Egyptian traditions, presented themselves as legitimate pharaohs, maintained the temples and rituals. Egypt's cultural power was such that even its conquerors became, in a sense, Egyptian. But the autonomy was gone, the glory diminished. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. He founded Alexandria, which would become one of the great cities of the ancient world, a center of learning and culture. But it was a Greek city, not an Egyptian one. And the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander's death was Greek, speaking Greek, following Greek customs, even as they presented themselves to the Egyptian people as traditional pharaohs. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh, was Greek by ancestry, but Egyptian by choice and political necessity. She was the first of the Ptolemies to learn the Egyptian language, to participate in Egyptian religious rituals, to present herself as a true daughter of the Nile. She was brilliant, politically astute, a survivor in a world of Roman power politics. But even her intelligence and charm could not save Egypt. After her defeat and suicide in 30 BCE, Egypt became a province of Rome, its grain feeding the empire, its wealth flowing to Rome, its independence extinguished. The age of the pharaohs was over. The temples would continue to function for a few more centuries, maintained by tradition and inertia, but the living heart of Egyptian religion was fading. The last hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 CE at the Temple of Isis at Philae. After that, silence. The sacred writing was forgotten, the gods abandoned, the ancient knowledge lost. For over 1,000 years, Egypt's monuments stood mute and mysterious. The pyramids were wonders, but no one knew who had built them or why. The hieroglyphs were decorative mysteries, beautiful but unreadable. Travelers came, marveled, and left, taking pieces of Egypt with them. Obelisks transported to Rome, statues shipped to European museums, mummies ground up for medicine or unwrapped at Victorian parties. Egypt became a source of exotic curiosities, its civilization reduced to objects in cabinets of wonders. But the monuments endured, patient and silent, waiting for someone to remember, to understand, to read the stories written in stone. The breakthrough came in 1799, when French soldiers in Napoleon's army discovered the Rosetta Stone, a granite stele inscribed with the same text in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek. The Greek could be read, and scholars realized that if they could match the Greek text to the hieroglyphs, they could crack the code, could learn to read the ancient writing. It took decades of work, but in 1822, Jean-François Champollion announced that he had deciphered hieroglyphs. The ancient voices could speak again. The temples and tombs could tell their stories. Egypt's history, silent for so long, came flooding back. 3,000 years of kings and gods, wars and rituals, daily life and cosmic beliefs. The civilization that had seemed lost forever was recovered, not in its living form, but in memory, in understanding, in the ability to read what the ancients had written. And what they had written was beautiful. Love poems and wisdom literature, hymns to the gods and instructions for the afterlife, administrative records and personal letters. The Egyptians emerged from their texts as fully human, worried about their children, proud of their accomplishments, afraid of death, hopeful for the future, in love with life despite knowing it would end. They were not so different from us, these people who lived so long ago. They wanted what we want, to be remembered, to matter, to leave something behind that would outlast their brief time on Earth. And they succeeded. The pyramids still stand, the temples still bear their inscriptions, the mummies still rest in their tombs. Egypt endured not because it never fell, but because it built so well, wrote so much, believed so deeply that even death and time could not erase it completely. There is a particular beauty in ruins, a melancholy poetry in stones that have outlasted the civilization that shaped them. The temple at Karnak, with its forest of columns open to the sky, birds nesting in the capitals where once only priests could walk. The Sphinx, weathered by millennia of sandstorms, its face eroded but still recognizable, still gazing toward the sunrise. The tombs in the Valley of the Kings, their painted walls still bright after 3,000 years in darkness. These ruins are not failures, they are victories. They are proof that something of us survives, that the human desire to create, to build, to make meaning is stronger than time's erosion. And so tonight, as you finally surrender to sleep, imagine yourself standing in the ruins of Karnak at sunset. The tourists have left, the guards have retreated, and you are alone among the columns. The light is golden, slanting through the stone forest, casting long shadows. The air is still warm from the day's heat, but cooling now, gentle. You can hear birds settling for the night, the distant sound of the Nile, the whisper of wind through the ruins. These stones have stood here for over 3,000 years. They have seen empires rise and fall, religions born and die, languages spoken and forgotten. And they remain patient witnesses to the passage of time, to the persistence of human ambition, to the strange fact that even when civilizations end, something of them endures. Let that long perspective settle over you now. Let the knowledge that Egypt fell but is not forgotten, that the pyramids still stand, that the hieroglyphs can still be read. Let that comfort you. Nothing lasts forever, but nothing is entirely lost either. What we build, what we create, what we love, it echoes forward, touches lives we'll never know, survives in ways we can't predict. You are part of that echo, that long chain of human existence, stretching back to the first pyramid builders and forward to people not yet born. Your life is brief, but it matters. It adds to the story. It becomes part of the eternal echo. Rest now in the ruins of Karnak under the Egyptian stars. The Nile still flows, as it has flowed for millions of years. The desert still stretches away in all directions, patient and eternal. And you, in this moment, are connected to everyone who has ever stood in this place, who has ever looked at these stones and felt the weight of time, the beauty of endurance, the quiet peace that comes from knowing that we are all part of something larger than ourselves, something that began long before us and will continue long after we're gone. Sleep well. Dream of pyramids and temples, of gods and pharaohs, of the Nile flowing through the desert, bringing life to the sand. Dream of Egypt, eternal Egypt, fallen but not forgotten, silent but still speaking to anyone willing to listen. The ancient voices are still there, carved in stone, written on papyrus, waiting in the darkness of tombs. And tomorrow, when you wake, they will still be there, still waiting, still telling their stories to anyone who cares to hear. The journey is complete, the story is told, and you, like the ancient Egyptians, have made it through the night. The sun will rise again, as it always has, as it always will. Ra has defeated Apophis once more. The world continues, and you are part of it, now and always, in the eternal echo of existence. Rest now. You have earned it. The pyramids will still be standing when you wake.